What's up, guys? Today we're going to be talking about guard passing. Guard passing can be one of the hardest parts of jiu-jitsu. Today I'm going to teach you one simple concept and 4 approaches to easily pass the guard. Let's get into it. The biggest problem that makes guard passing difficult is that I'm trying to pass 2 of his legs with 2 of my hands. His legs are typically going to beat my arms. Even if I start to make progress, he can easily use his hands to break my connections and reestablish his legs as his primary tools. The solution is what I call checkpoint passing. The idea is that I use my legs and my footwork to briefly immobilize one of his legs. This evens the odds and allows me to pass the guard. The first checkpoint I'm going to look to step into is a full flank. So I begin by pressing against his shins, keeping my legs far enough away where he can't connect. If I step too close, he's going to connect and tangle me up. Now I'm going to begin by taking a cross step and stepping beyond his hip line, tight towards his body. This sets up a pivot for me to take my right leg and step around towards the shoulder as I switch my hands. Now it's important that as I take this step, I step towards his hip and immediately turn my knee in. If I leave my knee facing his head, it's going to be easy for him to kick through and start entangling my legs and putting me down. Now, once I make it around the corner, I have a few different passes I can try. If the near side leg is low to the mat and underneath my knee, I'm going to look for a cross body position. So I'm going to drop my near side hand to the mat right next to his hip line, and I'm going to drop my other hand around his neck. I'm lacing some cross body posts here. I'm just going to drop my head to his other hip, and I'm going to kick my legs out to go chest to chest. Now, if my partner does frame me as I look for this pass, I'm just going to use my head to pummel inside and drop chest to chest. So I post my hands, and I dig my head against his far hip, kicking my legs out and dropping chest to chest. If my partner's near side knee stays high in the sky, I'm not going to be able to pummel my hand to his hip line. So instead, I'm going to continue walking to north-south and pass from here. There's a lot of structure in between me and his chest, and so I'm going to need to use something to carve a way through. So I'm going to keep my hands on his shins, keeping his legs controlled, and then I'm going to pummel one of my elbows to the inside of his thigh. Now, I only have a narrow path through, so I'm going to use my head to follow my own elbow and continue down. Now I can drop my elbow to the floor, collapse my chest, and pass. Now, if I get to north-south and I'm starting to pass, my opponent might place their frames on my hips. So instead of trying to beat both at once, I'm going to pick one and collapse it. So as I look to cut my elbow through, I'm going to walk my feet away from it, and then I'm going to hip drop that same side hip. This kills the frame and allows me to pummel through. The next problem you might deal with is that as you step around the corner, your opponent collects your near side leg. This is gonna make it difficult for me to step back, and I won't be able to pass from north-south. So instead, I'm gonna look to drop my knee across his belt and take mount. First, I'm gonna take my inside hand and place it across his outside hip. Then my far side hand is gonna place across his outside shoulder. This is gonna help me keep him flattened out as I take position. Now I'm just going to pivot and drop my knee across his belt line. As I do this, I can kick it through and take mount. Now, if I begin looking to flank my opponent, a pretty common response is for him to flare his knee out. This is gonna make it really difficult for me to sweep around the corner. So instead, what I'm gonna look for is a cross-side shin pin. So I step that same leg, the cross-side leg, and I'm gonna step it right against his shin. Now, as I step here, I wanna make sure that I'm low on his ankle for maximum leverage over his leg, and I wanna make sure that I'm stuffing his shin into his tailbone. So I'm dropping this top knee down to angle it, and I'm keeping his ankle as close to his butt as possible. This is gonna make it really difficult for him to kick out and free himself from this position. Now, as I step into this shin pin, I wanna maximize my control over his legs. So I'm gonna switch my outside hand into a hip post, keeping his hip flat to the mat and flaring my elbow to avoid the high pummel. My head is gonna connect to that shoulder to further stay safe from that high pummel. My inside hand is gonna go directly over the knee, keeping it down so he can't pummel out of this pin. Now let's pass the guard. So if his knee stays low in this shin pin, it's very easy to knee cut across. So I'm keeping my weight down over his legs. I'm gonna drop my knee as close to his hip as possible. And as I drop it down, I'm not gonna let it hit the floor to kill my momentum. I'm instead gonna shoot my knee out, keeping my weight on him as I cover to side control. As I knee cut across, I wanna make sure I deal with his arms. So as I send my knee across, I drop my far side arm to an underhook and I collect his near side tricep. I'm gonna pull this up as I pull myself into side control. If his knee is a little bit too high to knee cut, I'm instead gonna look for an X pass. So I keep my hip and knee post, I keep my head protected, and I'm just gonna look to stuff his knee into the center and away from me. So I kick my leg out, I stuff that knee, and then I collapse onto him. As I do this X pass, I wanna stuff his knee into the center and point both of his knees away from me. Only then can I collapse down into side control. If my opponent is able to free this shin pin, I'm instead gonna look for a leg drag pass. So as he kicks that foot up, I'm going to scoop his thigh with my inside arm, and I'm gonna pull it across my hip line as I collapse over his opposite thigh. Now from here, I collapse over both legs, swivel around the corner, and take side control. Now if my opponent is able to high pummel, he's going to be able to stomp me away and free this shin pin. And so instead, as he looks to high pummel, I'm going to switch the shin pin and duck his high pummel. So I switch and I duck. Now from here, I take a scoop grip on the leg, and I'm gonna look to knee cut and whip myself around the corner. So I cut across his heel, pulling him into the scoop grip, and then whipping around the corner. The next checkpoint we're looking at is the split squat. As I look to flank him or I look to shin pin, typically he's gonna open that near side leg. This is gonna make it very difficult for me to step around the corner, and it's gonna make it impossible for me to pin this shin. So instead, I'm gonna drop into a split squat. As I step to flank and he opens that leg, I'm going to look for a knee cut across this thigh. So I stuff both of his shins down and I drop my shin over his thigh. Now because I don't have this upper leg controlled, it's gonna be very easy for him to throw that knee shield in, and I'm gonna get stopped here. That's okay, this is the split squat and this is one of our checkpoints. From here, I wanna make sure that I'm making my body convex. That means I'm pressuring my chest forward and my shoulders back. By opening my body, it makes the surface he's framing round and easier to slip. So I'm opening my body and pressuring in. I also wanna make sure that I'm covering over the top of his knee with my hip and my gut. That's gonna make it very difficult for him to open this leg and get rid of this position. Now I also wanna make sure that my shin pinning leg is keeping his thigh flat to the mat. If I let him elevate me, I'm gonna get off balance and kicked out of position. Now the first pass I'm looking for is a simple knee cut. If my opponent keeps his knee shield high, it's gonna be very easy. All I'm gonna look to do is stuff his inside wrist to his gut, clearing some space, and then I'm gonna pummel my outside hand underneath his arm. I'm looking to get my elbow to the inside of his knee. If I'm ever able to do that, the knee cut is free. So I pummel that, I kind of knock his knee away from my center line, and I cut through. As I cut through, I turn to face and cover to side control. If my opponent's knee shield is high, but I'm not able to pummel my top arm to the inside, I can instead look to split his legs to pass. So I'm gonna lean in, planting weight over his shoulder, and then I'm going to switch my outside leg to a shin pin. As I get this shin pin switched, I'm free to kick my inside leg back and around his hip. As I get this leg around the corner, I wanna make sure that I'm leaning my knee into his hip line. This is gonna keep his leg controlled and maintain tension. As I get here, I walk my foot up, creating pressure against his hips, and then I'm gonna look to collapse chest to chest. I collect a crossface and ideally an underhook. And then I'm going to be able to flip my foot across his thigh and kick off to pass. Now if instead my opponent's knee shield is really low to the mat, I'm gonna look for a weave pass. So I take my outside arm and I go to the inside of his leg, planting my fist on the mat. Now it's really important here that I turn my elbow in. This is gonna allow me to drop my shoulder over the top of that knee. If my elbow is facing out, it kind of gets in the way as I try to drop weight. So turn that elbow in and drop that shoulder down. Now my other hand is looking to post over his neck. I'm just trying to keep him crunched up as I perform this pass. So I go to this crossbody position. Now I'm going to cut through, kick out, and clear the corner. Now, as I clear the corner here and look for my pass, it's often best to go all the way to a north-south position. Because of my hand configuration, it's gonna make it easier to collapse chest to chest and start pummeling in. The last checkpoint we're gonna talk about is headquarters. If I go to flank my opponent and he squares up to me, instead of stepping towards this near side thigh, I'm going to step towards the far side thigh. As I step into position, I shin pin that far thigh and I sit on top of his other shin. I wanna make sure my shin pin staples his thigh to the mat, keeping weight on it. And I wanna make sure I sit deep against his shin, keeping it tight towards his tailbone. Now the first pass I'm gonna look for here is if his knee is too deep into the pocket. Now if this is happening, it's very easy for me to pop this knee into the center and take mount. So I'm going to hip in to force him to push against me. I'm gonna release my pressure momentarily and use a hand to pop it into the middle. Then I drop down and cover to mount. Now as you get more advanced, you're rarely gonna be able to use this top hand to plant against the knee. You're instead gonna be using it to pin wrists and hand fight. But I can use my top side foot to lay shin to shin, kicking out to clear that knee. Then I collapse and cover to mount. Now, if my opponent is playing more conservative with this top knee, I'm not going to be able to pop it into the center. So instead, what I'm gonna look to do is hip switch and pass it to the inside. Now, as I look to hit this hip switch, I wanna make sure that my thigh connects to the outside of his hip. So I drive in, I begin to switch, and I keep this connection active as I switch. Now, as I step into headquarters, my opponent might flare his knee outwards. If this happens, instead, I'm gonna look for a knee cut. Now, if I try to knee cut by extracting my knee out and then coming across, he's gonna be able to place his knee shield and stop me. So instead, I'm gonna look to drag my knee all the way across his chest, keeping my lat tight so that he can't replace that knee shield as I cut. The beauty in the strategy of checkpoint passing is all about relative work rate. By stepping into these checkpoints, you make your opponent work much harder to retain their guard. Every time they block a pass and every time they kick you out of a checkpoint, they're exerting energy. Don't overcommit to a single path. If you find it difficult to maintain a checkpoint or get a pass going, just step away and restart. Thanks for watching. Click here for a video YouTube thinks you'll love, and click the link below to join our email list for more exclusive content.